So in the first part of training, you learned about Acumen. What is Acumen? What are the different pieces that go together to make an Acumen-driven site? Yesterday, thank you, Tyler. Yesterday, we explored the concept of the site project and the site definition. With a site project and a site definition, you can build complete libraries of pages or content or terms or any other elements that go into building the framework of a site, including your master page, your layouts for virtual pages, and any virtual pages you want to launch with. Generally, when I build a new project or a new widget library, I'll build a set of widgets. Along with those widgets, I'll build some content that might need to go in there, some terms that might need to go in there. I might have files like images and such that I want to upload. And then along with that, I'll often build a virtual page just to demonstrate that library. And so that's kind of one thing that we can do. So we can use this to create libraries of widgets to demonstrate, or entire subsites or entire sites. In fact, the Hive site that we typically demo, that's built using the same type of site definition. It's a project. And so it gives you that capability. But all of that just gives you a framework for that functionality, for those widgets. So if we go to the Kumina community and we go here to widget guides, I mentioned yesterday, there's some articles in here. Under the widgets overview, you'll see there's 4 articles. If we click in here, we can learn more about widgets. You'll notice versioning is important because we get more and more capabilities as we go to newer versions. You'll notice we don't have a widgets overview for version 5.5. That's because they're the same. From 5.0 to 5.5, the widgets structure and the concept was identical. So if we go to this page, and I will put this into the chat, so you have it. We can look and see what widgets are all about. Widgets have a definition. That's your blueprint. The widget definition defines the name of the widget, its namespace and class, where or what all the properties are that are going to power that widget, along with their types and default values. It also defines what views are available for the widget to render itself with, and where the JavaScript is that powers the widget. Widgets have instances over here. In the widget instance, so you've got your definition, it points to your source, it also points to all your views. Your instance is the implementation of that design. So in an instance, it'll have its own unique name and description. It'll have an icon, a unique ID. That ID is critical, as we'll see when we put these in pages. But the instance also has what view or views can render it, as well as the values for all of the properties that are used to drive it. So what you can do with a definition and different instances is you can have the same widget definition with different views and different properties render fundamentally different output. As you can see here, we've got this sort of flyout menu here. This is more of your traditional menu. This is more of a drop down. So these are 3 very different views or instances of the same widget. A lot of this will make more sense once we actually get into building a widget. Widgets are managed in the app manager using the Widget Manager app. The Widget Manager is available, this is an old screenshot. The Widget Manager is available under the Management Apps tab and has a list of all your widgets. Now we're using the central delivery site architecture. In this case, most widgets are defined in the central site, but instances are declared in the delivery sites themselves. It's not always the case, but that is one option. You can have the entire widget definition and all of its instances in one delivery site. You can split them like that, and you can even have instances at the central site level. and more and more and more about widgets. I want to scroll down here because I want to talk a bit about widget views. Here we go. It's kind of hard to see. Again, a lot of this is going to make sense, a little bit more sense here in about 7 minutes when we start to build our own widget. But all widgets have views. These views are typically written in HTML using handlebars. Handlebars is a public available tagging technology. You can think about like a mail merge in Word, where you're taking data and you're inserting that data into your HTML template and getting output. Handlebars allows for logic, so you can have if statements in there. You can also have blocks. So if I have an object and I want to get to its child data, I can add a block tag and access the child values of that object. If it's an array and I add a block tag, it will iterate through that array. So there's a lot of power with handlebars. You can also build views in React. We're going to take a look at one of those views today, but we'll be focused on the HTML handlebars method of views. Here's another good example. I've got an if else here. I've got this show header, for example. This is nice. Show header is a Boolean. So all I have to do is I can even just use a block. And if that value is true, everything inside it gets rendered. And I have elements within it. So there's a lot of power in that view. So what we're going to do, I just want to leave you there with that. Please feel free to review that page. But what we're going to do now is we're going to build a widget. So open up your project, and we're going to do this together. What do we want to build? We're going to build a widget, a real simple widget. That simple widget is going to take the value of a property. So we're going to define a property on it. We're going to take the value of that property, and we're just going to display the value in our output. So we're going to make it nice and simple. So each of us needs to build our own widget. So to do that, we execute, and this is where you get to start following along. So exercise time. Go into your terminal and do npm run stub. This is going to run the widget generator. Side note, if you want to build activity stream cards, you'll need to create a project in version 5, not version 5.5. You'll want to create it in version 5. It's going to ask you if you want to build an activity stream card. If you say yes, it will set up a completely different project structure. And in fact, the generator would be an Akumina card generator or an activity stream card generator instead. So a little side note, if you want to do activity stream cards, it's a different kind of project, but you still execute npm run stub and follow through the wizard. All right, we need to each give our widget its own name. So I'm going to call mine Brad Hello, and you can call yours whatever you want. But let's try to put our names in our widgets so that we don't. In fact, I'm going to say Brad Hello World, so that we don't overwrite each other's widget. So give your widget a unique name. The class of your widget. You may recall from day 2 when we set up our projects, that class needs to match what Webpack config has in it. So we open up Webpack config, it's going to be mysite.widgets. That's our class. If you want that to be different, you want to make sure it's different in here. Whatever the values are in here, you need to enter here. Just like that, mysite.widgets. We're going to make it, it's going to be a Hello World widget. So let's just use the Hello World sample. We're going to take a look at that get list sample later. When you first generated your project, it asks you where you wanted your widget source. If you left that the default, then you can always leave the default here. If you changed it there, you'll need to change it here. By the way, just hitting enter for any of these selects the default. Do you want this stub to be used for an instance only? We don't. We're going to build a complete widget. In our second exercise today, we're going to build an instance of an existing widget. Most of the time, when you're building widgets, unless you're building something truly custom, and we'll talk about when you want to build a custom widget versus using an existing one. Unless you need to build something completely custom, most of the time you're going to be building instances of existing widgets. Like I said, we're going to do that in the second exercise. For the first exercise, we're building a complete custom widget. And if you prefer to use TypeScript, this is a trick question here. When you first set up your project, it asked you if you wanted to use TypeScript. If you said yes there, you can say yes here. If you said no there, you have to say no here. Just like activity stream card projects, just like projects that use React, just like the different projects have to be structured differently when you first set them up. So I often build widgets using TypeScript. I often build widgets using React, but each of those different technologies is a different project structure. So you need to actually have a different project for it. I have a React widget library. I have a TypeScript widget library, and I have a JavaScript widget library that I use just for my own sandbox purposes. So in this case, we're always in this training going to be answering no to this last question. Once you do that, over here in Source.js widgets, you should see your widget. You're going to see a folder here, 3 folders inside it. I'm going to work bottom up here. The bottom folder is a sample view. If I click it, we see that it's just a div tag with some stub text here and this debug tag right up here at the top. That's handlebars. That is a handlebars extension that we've got in the system. If you have this tag right here in your view and debugging is enabled for your site, that's an administrative function you can select. Then when your widget gets rendered, it will push various items of information, including the data object that you're trying to map. It'll push all that out to the developer console in your browser developer tools. So debugging must be enabled for the site. That debug tag needs to be there in the view, and you need your developer tools open. So I always strongly recommend leaving the debug tag in your view, because in a production environment, debugging is going to be turned off, so that's not a problem right there. If you need to fix a problem, you simply turn on debugging in your site, and then you get that extra data in the console. So as long as debugging is turned off or the console is not open, there's no overhead. So I always leave the debug tag there. We're going to be adding, or we're going to be altering this view here in a little bit together. There is one JavaScript file. Note that the widget generator names it the same as your widget. That doesn't have to be. In fact, if you go out and look at the JavaScript files for the Akumina widgets, we have the full namespace as the name of the file. So it'd be typically our widgets are in the Akumina.add-in namespace. So if this was one of the Akumina production widgets, it would actually be Akumina.add-in.bradhelloworld.js. So it's kind of a long name. This is nice and simple. You can name your JavaScript file anything you want because, and this is where we're going to jump into the configuration, in the config file, you specify its name right here. So you can name it anything you want. The widget generator gives it the same name as your widget. So it's up to you. All right, I'm going to do a couple of things here. Get rid of this. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Let's walk through the configuration of your widget. The widget generator built all these files for you, so you might want to modify them. There's the name of my widget. You'll notice that it matches the third part of my widget class. That does not have to be matching. In all except for one case that I know of, I've never seen a widget that doesn't match, but there's one that doesn't, and we're going to be using that later today. Your widget has a name, it has a description. You can give it a better description than blank. I recommend that. Your widget can also have its own icon. This is a font awesome icon. So something like FA Cog. If you're not familiar with Font Awesome, we support up through Font Awesome 6. And you can just Google. It's great. If you want to use an icon, just Google Font Awesome and a name that kind of describes the icon you want to use, and you're going to get a result. So you can put that icon in here if you want. I'm going to leave it out. Description, icon are optional. content types. This is a funky one. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you have a property that is of type list selector, so that your users or your administrators can select a list when they're editing content or editing widget types, then in here, if I put a content type, it'll restrict the list of lists that are available down to only those that match that content type. So yesterday, when we were talking about lists with content types, this is where content types can become very valuable and make it easier for your administrators to build instances in the App Manager. So take a look at the Learning Center for more about how to add content types. They're essentially just a string array. You can version your widget just like we can version some of the other elements. This is generally reserved for use with, say, Azure DevOps, where it will insert a version on deployment, and it's all about how you choose to automate. Dependencies. You can inherit from another widget. So if you find an example where it's like, oh, I need to do this. I need to do exactly what that widget does, but I need to add this one little thing to it. You can add the widget in here as a dependency and then use that in your JavaScript code. It'll really simplify your JavaScript. It'll also centralize the functionality so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. And it can really speed up your development. One of the most common dependencies is a widget that we call the generic list widget. The generic list widget is already a very powerful widget for getting list data. If you use that as a dependency, then in your widget, all you have to do is add anything extra to it. We're going to talk about other things you can do toward the end of today's training. All right, properties. This is where you define the types of properties that your widget might use. Remember, for this widget, we are going to use the value of a property and display it. So let's change this name. The widget generator gave us this one sample property. As you can see, this can be an array, so you can have multiple properties in here, and as many as you want. So we're going to call this display text, and let's give it a better value or a better label. How about show this text? So go ahead and change these two lines and raise your hand in Teams once you're done, and we'll continue. All right, and Richard, are you going to be doing the exercises? I know you've probably done this before.
Yeah, I've done it before, but I'm following along.
Okay. All right, but I guess the question is, should I wait for you?
Yeah, you don't need to.
Okay. All right, thanks everybody. Everybody can lower their hands. So now we've given our widget a property with a given name. We could give it a default value if we wanted to. There are different property types. Take a look at the Learning Center for more info on those types. I'll show you where to look. If we go into knowledge base, go to the developer wiki, go to widget builder. Now if we scroll down, actually, got to find the right page here. Sometimes it's hard to find. Go back up here. Oh, there we go. Here we go. So the different types of properties you can have: int, so it's an integer; a string; a boolean; a choice. So boolean, you can set defaults. So you can set a default value for the booleans as true or false. Choices, you can give it a drop down. JSON string. So this is a text box, but if you enter a value that isn't a valid JSON string, the app manager will complain. So it's a great way to sort of pre-check your JSON to make sure it's valid. List selector, item selector, and group selector. So these are all the different types that you can use. And I was going to look and see if we had examples Yeah, so anyway, so there's that. I do have, you're going to get a widget best practices guide. It goes into more detail on those. All right, so we're going to have a property that stores a string. Now, the widget generator gave us one sample view called default. You can rename that if you want. I generally do recommend naming your views to match what you're doing with them. We can leave that as default. If you want to add multiple views to your widget, which I often do, make sure each has a unique GUID. That ID must be unique across the environment, so generate it and add it. Just like properties, you can add multiple views because this is an array. Each view must have a unique name. I generally recommend the name and the file match. They don't have to, but I do recommend that. You will only ever have one JavaScript file. The widget generator put it right here. You may notice this asset library name. That is a tag that gets processed when you package your widget. If you package it for CDN, it's going to be different than if you package it for deployment to SharePoint. If you're in Classic, it will be different than if you're in Modern. So this tag is used to make sure that the right path gets inserted here during your deployment. That is it. That's all you need for your definition. Your name, your class, any properties, any views, and your JavaScript. So let's close that so we don't need to look at that. Now, the widget generator gave us one sample instance. Notice the plural here, instances. It gave us one sample, but we can add many instances here. So if we want to create, let's say we're creating a new widget to get weather, and we've got 3 views. Well, we might want 3 instances so we can demonstrate all 3 views. So that's why you have the ability to have multiple instances right here. So it gives us this hello world stub instance here. You could probably rename that if you wanted to. Better description might be helpful. There's an icon for the instance itself and its unique ID. Just like views, if you add another instance here, you'll need to generate a unique ID for it. The widget generator gave us this one. It also put a sample property down in here. Up above in the definition, we're defining the property. Down here in the instance, we're giving that property a value. So we'll change that name to display text. And hey, why not? It's hello world. All right, go ahead and make those changes here and raise your hand when you're done.
Hey, Brad, just a quick question too.
Yeah.
And we might be getting to this, so I'm jumping ahead. Just let me know. For like each view, I know that you obviously can have like your own HTML, but is there just a single CSS file for each, or is that even like?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. So you may remember yesterday we had that custom CSS file, the digitalworkplace.custom.css. That's where you would put any common CSS, especially if you're going to build like a library of widgets. You'd want to put your CSS in there so that you're not repeating it. But if you have CSS that is specific to a view, and you know you're not going to use that anywhere else, I guess there's some religious talk here that we're going to get into. Some people would say never put anything in the view except for HTML. I don't agree with that. I believe that if the style or if the CSS is unique to that view, won't be used anywhere else, put a style block in your view and put your CSS in there.
Gotcha.
You can also,
No, just say, yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. You can also add a script tag in your views. So again, if you have JavaScript that is specific to the view, especially if it's specific to the user interface within that view, put a script block in your view. But if it's common, if it's utility, if it's something that you're going to use across widgets or across your widget library, then you'd want to put them in the digitalworkplace.custom.js file. So it's really a matter of scope on both CSS and JavaScript when it comes to your view itself. All right, everybody lower your hands and we're going to take a look at the next file. So that's all we have to do. All we needed to do is give it a new property name and give that property a value. So now if we jump into the JavaScript file, this is where we're going to spend most of our morning. The widget generator gave us a nice sample JavaScript file here. It gives us everything we need to run our widget. If we did nothing, we would get a widget that just displayed the view. I talked about at the end of part 1, the idea of when you build a widget, you might start with just a static view. You could literally construct this widget, go in, put all your static markup in the view, make no changes to the config file or the JavaScript file, build it, package it, deploy it, and you will get your static view on the page. I always start that way. Whenever I build a widget, the first thing I do is I take the markup that I've already designed, I put that in my view, I build up the widget that has nothing in it functionally and deploy it to make sure that my markup works the way I want it. Then I start adding functionality and modifying the view as a template. But that's a good process in my book. All right, so what do we have here? Every widget must have an init function. When the page first loads, there's a step in the page load process that's going to go look through the page for any tags that have a class that includes ak-widget. If it finds one, it's going to grab the ID from that. From that ID, it's going to look up the instance, because remember, every instance has to have a unique ID. It's going to look up the instance. It's going to pull from the instance all the property values and grab the selected view as well as the appropriate JavaScript file to run that widget. When it finds all that, it's going to load up that file and it's going to call the init method. It's going to call the init method and pass in all of the widget's properties plus about 6 other properties. So you've got all your properties, but it's going to also pass in the ID of the instance, the path to the selected view, that's your display template URL, and like, is it a React or not? There's a few other properties it's going to pass in this properties object. The widget generator makes it easy to parse that properties object because it gives us this set defaults properties function, and in there, the get property value function. These are just helper functions that make it easy for you to parse the properties object that is inserted. Technically, you do not need to do anything in set defaults properties. In fact, technically, you don't even need to do that at all because you already have the properties object. All you really need to do is copy the properties into your object of your widget, into your widget object itself. So this isn't really necessary, but I generally do it anyway because you'll notice here, I don't really know the case of my property name. And because I don't really know the case, I don't know if is that a capital T, is it a lowercase d, is that T capitalized there? I don't know. So instead, I'm just simply copying it into a variable within my object. So this just ensures that I know the case of the variable. It also ensures that there's a default, which I can add in this third value here. You'll notice these are empty strings. This is the default value. So if I request a value of a property and it doesn't, and it's not in there, maybe it's not set, maybe they didn't add it into the instance or something. If I put a default right here, then I still have a value where I need it. So this just is a helper function that gets me a little bit closer. All right, so we only have one property that we care about. We always want to ingest the sender ID and the display template URL. That's my instance ID. We're going to need that. That's my view. We're going to definitely need that. But we need to clean this up a little bit. Let's go ahead and just kind of clean up that line right there. And we're going to ingest our new property, display text. And let's pull it into a variable called display text. That's all we're doing. We're just parsing that. We're parsing that properties object into a variable right here. So go ahead and clean up that one line and make this change right here. That was just a sample that the widget generator gave us. We're going to make it real. And raise your hand when you're ready to move on. All right, thank you. Go ahead and lower your hands, and we're going to talk about what's left in this init method. So what are we doing in the init method? Well, we're parsing our properties object. We're pulling in those values. And we're doing that on this line right here. We also have this line right here where we're going to check to see if that widget's currently being edited. In the user interface, I can edit the widget properties, but it's going to load the widget when I do that. And so I might want to make choices as to what I want to display based on whether it's being edited at the time. That's all we're doing there. So we're just going to pull that in. The last thing we do in the init method is we call these, we execute these lines down here. One of the reasons that we pull in the unique ID of our instance is because we want to insert markup where that instance is rendered on the page. So on the page, it's typically just a div tag. It's going to be invisible. We want to insert some markup in there. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to grab that value just for simplicity. And we're going to use jQuery to insert some markup. This markup is that loading template right here. Remember we talked about the various different contexts and constants. One of the context variables is the value of that loading template that was in the core folder. That's where if you want to change that loading template, you can, and every widget that uses it is going to render that instead. I always recommend doing this because what's happening here is the page loads, then every init function gets executed, then the widgets exit. At this point, after I do this little bit here, I'm going to subscribe to a couple of events and I'm done. I'm out. So it's very good practice to give the user some kind of information so they know something is going to happen. So page loads, then widgets are initialized, then all the widgets render themselves. Sometimes that rendering can take some time. So we want to give the user some kind of feedback so they know it's loading. That's what this is all about. I rarely use the loading template when I build widgets. Instead, I usually have a view in my widget that that's essentially a framework for what will be filled in. That way, the display on the website doesn't bounce around, right? I always create what I call a container view or a loading view that's already going to take up the space of the widget, and then I populate it with whatever I want. Sometimes I'll actually populate it with token values from a data object. So there's a lot you can do here, but the point is the init method needs to be pretty quick, right? You're just parsing the properties, providing output to the user so they know what's happening, and subscribing to the methods. So the two events we're subscribing to here are updated and completed. Widget updated. I mentioned earlier that in the user interface, you can edit the properties of a widget instance in the page. When you're done, you click a button that says update, and that will fire this event right here. We'll need to reload the property values and then display the widget. So we have a method here we're calling refresh widget. You can call it anything you want. We're also subscribing to this loader completed. This says that every widget has initialized. Once every widget initializes, then the widgets can draw themselves. So we're going to render our widget. The widget generator gives us that refresh widget method. It's going to grab the property values and render the widget. So it's simply going to update the properties and call render. The render method is where you do your work. In the init phase of your widget, you're parsing your properties, providing immediate feedback to the user that you're loading. In the render method, you're actually doing your work. In this case, we have a data object. You can call it anything you want. We're using data. And in this case, we're going to just simply pass a value into it. Well, the widget generator gave us this one. We're not going to use that. We're going to use our variable display text. So we're going to insert a variable into our data object. Let's call this text out. So we're going to copy display text into our data object into a variable we're calling text out. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to find our template. What is that doing? Well, the bind template method provided to you by the widget generator is going to call parse template. Parse template will take the path to your view, your data object that you've just built, and merge them into markup. Then, just like before, we're going to use jQuery to insert that markup into the page, right inside that div where your widget instance was represented. The last thing we do is publish widget loaded with all our properties. This tells the system that we're done. It also populates the debug panel. If we don't publish this method, you're going to see widget not found in the debug panel with your unique instance ID and no values in there. It's useless. Publish this method when you're done, and you'll have better information about your widgets that are on the page. All right, so go ahead and change this line here to copy the value from your variable up here into your data object into a variable called text out within that data object. Go ahead and do that and raise your hand when you're done. All right, so we've taken a property, or we've added a property called display text to our widget. We've given that property a value. We've ingested that value into a variable in our widget, and we've copied that value into our data object, which we're merging with our view. How do we merge it? You can go ahead and lower your hands. Let's go take a look at that view. All right, as you saw here, we got a sample, but we can put our value in. Let's replace that by using double curly braces like that and inserting the variable name from our data object. You'll notice I don't have data.text out because the object I'm actually merging it with is not really part of this. It's the variables and arrays and other elements within that object. So that's all we have to do. And case is important, so it needs to match the variable name. What's going to happen is it's going to take that data object, the variable text out that's in there, and it's going to replace this tag with that. So go ahead and make that change in your view and raise your hand when you're ready.
Speaking of case, I saw you had a small t on line 17 of your other JS. Is that supposed to be capital or?
So this is going to be my property, and I did this intentionally by using capitals here and lowercase here. If you look at the parser, it's actually it's doing a 2 lowercase right here.
Oh, okay.
And so it doesn't really matter what you put here.
Okay.
And we do that because a lot of times you may not remember, what is the case here of our property value. And there's inconsistency typically there. And so in here, we just say, you know what, we don't care what the case is here, but it is gonna matter here because it has to matter here, being a variable.
Okay, got it. I had done it. Okay, makes sense.
Okay, great. All right, so this is all we had to do. Now we can get our widget ready to deploy and get it out there. So we're going to open up our terminal, and we're going to run npm run build. This is going to run the webpack.js file against all JavaScript files that are in source.js widgets. And so it's going to webpack this. This is where it's going to insert my namespace. That's why the namespace, when I created my widget, has to match the namespace in Webpack. You may get this warning, don't worry about that. It's just a question of whether or not you're in production. Once you do that, you'll notice that there's a folder in here called dist widgets. There's my packed JavaScript. As you can see, it's nicely compacted onto one line. Very compact. So I get my compacted JavaScript right there once I've built it. So that's npm run build. We also have to execute npm run package. What this is going to do is it's going to prepare the widget for deployment into my SharePoint environment. You may recall earlier, if you're rendering a site in SharePoint directly, then the npm run package command is going to get everything ready to deploy out there and you're done. In our case, we're using a headless site. So we're going to package this so that our configuration, everything in the config.json file, that's all going to go to SharePoint because it gets stored in lists. It's data. So all that JSON is going to get converted to list data. We're also going to package, we're going to do another step called npm run cdn package. That's going to create a package that's to be deployed to our headless environment. That package includes the JS file as well as any views. So first step is npm run build. Second is npm run package. The next step is going to be npm run cdn package. Now, once you first deploy your widget, make any changes to your config file, you don't have to package it and deploy it out to SharePoint. If you have built and deployed your widget and you make a change to the config file, but not the JS file or the views, you don't have to deploy anything out to the headless. So keep that in mind that once it's first deployed, depending on what you're modifying, you're gonna deploy that either to your SharePoint world or your headless server. You can keep it in your head. If you modify config.json, you're going to deploy to SharePoint. If you modify your views or your JavaScript, you're going to deploy to headless. In this case, it's our first time, so we're going to end up deploying to both. So once you've executed npm run build, npm run package, and npm run cdn package, raise your hand and we'll continue. All right, so now we need to deploy it. To deploy it, we'll go out to our akumina.sitedeployer.config.json file. We're going to go ahead and set these two to false, virtual pages and virtual layouts. We'll set widgets to true and CDN assets to true. Now, at this point, I could deploy my widget and it would be out there, but I wouldn't have it on any pages. And you may recall yesterday that we can add widgets to our sample page. So before we deploy this widget, let's go modify our page. Go to virtual pages, go to your virtual page that you created yesterday. And in your zone 1, you're going to insert the following with some modifications. So I'm going to put this in the chat. Beware, this is one that you will want to put through Notepad before you insert it. A few things you'll have to change. You're going to need to put the title of your widget instance that you can grab from your config.json file. So there it is. That needs to go in. There we go. Right here. That's your instance title. That's going to ultimately be rendered as the rel attribute of a div tag. You want your instance ID. Be careful which ID you grab out of the config.json file. You want it to be the ID of your instance. And the widget name. So in your config file, open up your definition and grab the name from there. So yours is going to be different than mine, so you'll want to start with the blank that I put in there. So it's going to be the name of your instance, the ID of your instance, and the name of your widget definition. Once you've put this in your virtual page, raise your hand and we'll continue. And don't forget, I pasted an example in the chat.
Are we getting the ID from line 34 of config.json?
Yeah, so that's the ID you're going to use right there in your instance.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So many things open. I'm like going
Yeah.
slightly cross-eyed.
Hey, Brad.
Brad, I think you went on mute on accident, or you're just pausing.
Oh, I'm actually waiting. So once everybody's got this done right here, just go ahead and raise your hand.
Hey, Brad, I have a question here.
Yes.
So, for example, if we have to insert the inbuilt widgets, so do we need to insert the instance ID for those as well?
Oh, like for any existing widgets?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a tricky thing, and we'll actually get to that a little bit in the second exercise. But if you want to insert a widget into a virtual page using this mechanism, you have to have it defined down here, either as an instance or as, well, yeah, I mean, you'll have to have the instance defined down here, whether it's a fully built widget or a partial. And we're going to be doing a partial in the second exercise, so you'll see that. But yeah, you'll need the instance ID here, but it does have to be defined as part of your source. Otherwise, you can't insert it as part of your project. You'd have to go out to the site and insert it directly in the page.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so at this point, we've built our widget. We have packaged it for both SharePoint and CDN deployment, and we have told the system we want to insert our new widget instance in our training page. So when we go back out to our site deployer config file, note widgets, that's going to deploy my configuration to SharePoint. CDN assets will deploy my views and my JavaScript to my headless site. And let's go ahead and redeploy our virtual page. So set virtual pages to true, widgets to true, CDN assets to true, all three, because we're going to deploy our widget, our instance, and our virtual page. And we then execute npm run deploy. At this point, fingers crossed, let's hope everybody gets through this without errors. You'll notice it's doing add widget packages first. That's deploying my configuration out to SharePoint. And you'll see here, there's my widget. And technically, it actually deploys everything to SharePoint, but all we care about is the config. What was that, Brock?
Was that npm run deploy?
Yes.
Thanks.
Once it deploys your widgets, it's going to go to the next step, which is virtual pages, and will redeploy your sample page. Once it's redeployed your sample page, the last thing will be CDN assets. At this point, it's going to deploy the views and JS out to your CDN. So there we go. My views. You'll notice that it's deploying all sorts of stuff. Basically, everything that's in CDN assets, it's going to deploy. So by the way, the CDN package, if I go up here into CDN assets, you'll notice that there is under content templates, there's my view. Under JS, there's my JS file. So when I did CDN package, it put the files necessary out in the CDN assets folder. So when I executed the CDN assets step, it's still just going to deploy everything from CDN assets. That's fine, assuming that this is your master copy of all your source, which it should be. All right, so now we've deployed our widget. We have put our widget, and we've inserted the widget into the page itself. Now we need to go out to the site and make sure everything is in place.
Hey, Brad, I got a quick question. When I did my initial setup, I picked the, whatever that third step was, where it was like pick the stub template. So like I had 2 widgets in my source folder. And so like mine failed to deploy, but I guess, is that like if you have a widget that's not configured properly, will it fail to deploy, or is this something else?
So let's go back to your first, the first thing you said there. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So basically, you got the class wrong for your widget.
Yeah, like when I picked the stub, I picked the select list one by accident. Like my key kind of like double hit. So I have something called Luke Hello, and I have Luke Hello World. So like Luke Hello is I didn't actually change anything in it, but it failed on the deploy. So I guess my question is, like, if you have widgets that like are not configured.
Yeah, if the widget's misconfigured, so if your class is off, if your properties aren't defined properly, they may build and package, but they'll still fail to deploy because they won't be able to it won't map them properly into the data. So you and I can take that one offline, and let's look at that this afternoon.
Cool.
So yeah, I'll walk through that with you this afternoon. Okay, so assuming everything did deploy properly, so Luke, you and I can catch up on that later. Assuming everything did deploy properly, there's a couple of things you need to do before you get to see it. So you want to go out to your site, go launch into App Manager. In this case, we want to go to the central site. And there's 2 things we need to do out here. Under Management Apps, we'll want to go into the Widget Manager. And first, let's look for our widget. There it is. So you should see something like this. You'll notice at the central site, there's no instance because that got deployed into the delivery site. If we click cache widget instances, however, it's going to cache not only any widget instances at the central site, but any delivery site instances as well. So it's important to click cache widget instances right here. And don't forget, we want to recache our page. So once you've cached widget instances, go back to your management apps, go to page manager is going to be on your actual site. I usually just go back here to my page and relaunch the app manager. In management apps for the site, go to page manager. And you can either hit cache all or cache your page. I'm just going to hit cache all so you can see for 27 pages how long it takes to cache all 27 pages. Caching within Acumanet is pretty extensive, and generally during development, you'll find that you're going to be refreshing caches quite a bit. For production releases, they generally go out after hours, or if you're using Azure DevOps, they're going to go in the middle of the night automatically. You're not going to be doing this in a production world. This is only really for development. In production, the caches will catch up by the time anybody sees anything anyway. Generally, with development, going too quickly, so caching is important. So 27 pages cached in the time I told you that. All right, so let's go out to our page. Let's find it. Remember, to get to our page, we can go to search existing pages off our tray, or go to your history, and select your page, click navigate. All right, this is good. I'm glad I saw this. So widget issue, class is not a function. If you see this, then especially the first time you deploy a widget, that means that you've got a cache situation. I'm going to see if caching instances at my site level, my delivery site level, cleans that up. So we go to Management Apps, Widget Manager, cache widget instances here. Technically doing it at the central site should do it here, doesn't always do it. So I cache my widget instances there. I'm going to go back out to my page, click my debug panel right here. I'll go ahead and refresh I'll just refresh all these because it refreshes in a second. And I'm going to use the Control F5 here to reload my page with a hard reload, and there it is. So a few errors that can occur when you first deploy a widget. You can see the error that we just saw where it says class is not a function. Guaranteed that's because it hasn't cached the JavaScript for your widget yet. If that doesn't happen and you go to your page and you don't see your output, or you see just the static markup for your view, well, then you probably have a mismatch between your variables in your data object and the tag on your page or on your view. So how do you debug that? Well, you go to the debug panel. If we look at widgets on page, hey, look at this, we got a few widgets. This is a widget that did not fire, or that did not publish its event when it was done. That's what these are. We know the widget's on the page, but we don't know anything about it because the event didn't get published. If we scroll down here, though, we should see our widget. There we go. Here it is. So there's my widget. That's my instance name. That's the widget type. There's my instance ID. Here's my display text property. There's my view that I'm using. These are those extra properties that get inserted. But this is a link. Watch what happens when I open up my developer tools. So I'll put that kind of over here so you can see my console. If I click this, it says check developer console and click the function. Okay, I can do that. So I click that, and if I see in my console here, I get this little F right here. That's clickable. I click that, and I click this pretty print here. There's my source. You'll notice it's a little different. The Webpack really kind of did a lot to clean it up. But it's mostly the same. You'll notice my variable data, it truncated down to T. So it made it smaller. Basically, Webpack does just that. It packs up my widget code. But there's where I'm copying my variable into my data object. Up here, there's where I'm parsing my ingested object into a variable. Notice if I highlight it here, and if these two don't match, I've probably got a problem, because that means this value got copied into the variable, but maybe I used the wrong variable name here to copy into there. Does this match my data object? I don't know. So we should check our view, right? So those are the kinds of things you can do. And notice I can set breakpoints so I can check it. So if my view is coming out and all my tags are empty, or some of my tags are empty, this is about where I would want to put a breakpoint right here so I can see what my data object has in it. But remember, I had the debug tag in my view. If I had the debug tag in my view, then we're going to see this: digi view debugger start and digi view debugger end. It's not exactly obvious what widget just rendered that, but if I open up the object, I can look at the properties and probably guess. If this is empty, then I know I didn't copy my value through my JavaScript properly. So this is why the debug tag is really helpful. So that gives me all my properties, or actually gives me all the values in my data object right there. So you've got a number of different ways you can debug it. You can check here, you can go into the code, you can look in the debug output in your console. All of those things can help you debug a widget that may not be behaving as you expect.
Hey, Brad.
Yes.
Isn't this a security risk? Like we're displaying everything in plain text. Let's say I have a JavaScript in my widget. Let's say I know it's, shouldn't be putting all the credentials in plain text in the JavaScript file. But let's say, for example, my Azure Key Vault credentials, let's say I have put in my JavaScript in the widget. So anybody can come here and take a look at that, right?
They could. However, at the admin level for your site, you can disable debugging. And if it's disabled, and it should be disabled in production, you will not get any output with that debug tag.
Okay.
Yeah, so I recommend that. If we go here into settings, and I believe, oh no, that's right. It's a little tricky, but you got to go into site creator. There's actually a list, DigiSpace IDs or something like that. It's a big long list name that stores all of your configuration, but you can actually manage it through Site Creator. And you won't want to do this here, but I just wanted to show you how it works. Site Creator is kind of a big application. It takes a minute to load. All right, so what we do here is we just go to core, digital workplace core site, update configuration settings. And if we go in here, nope, that's not it. Oh, right, it did move. Sorry. Okay, we always get things moved to different places, and that's not it. See, this teaches me to not try to train people on stuff that I can't remember where it is.
Fine,
Yeah,
we get the idea.
yeah, it's more of an admin thing. So Tyler, you can probably teach people that later. But anyway, the point is you can turn off debugging and that'll go away. All right. That's how to create a new widget. But we've got 140 different widget types out there. Most of the time, especially if you're just getting data from SharePoint to display, there's going to be a widget that does the job. But sometimes there isn't. And that's when you need to build your own. But I want to talk about this widget right here, generic list widget. The generic list widget, its whole purpose is to make it easy to get data from a list. All you have to do is give it the list name and the fields that you want. There's about 27 properties, like how many items do you want it to return. You can pass it a filter, so you can do query filtering on it. You can attach a callback function. The callback function is something you put in your digital workplace .custom.js file, and you can use that to post process the data. So if you say I want everything from apps_ak, I want all the titles and the IDs, but I want to do a lookup on the titles and pull a label from something else. You can do that in the callback. So you can process that data and then return a different list or return a modified list for the callback. So there's a lot of power in generic list widget. We're going to look at that and use that. But before we do, I want to talk about how to find out more about widgets. So if we go back out to the community, go to widgets reference guide, you'll notice 130 articles. Here's all of the out-of-box widgets. And if we go down here to the generic list widget, we'll see There's its purpose, there's its features, there's the name of the widget. Yep, it's available version 4.1 and above. Hey, any content type can be used with all content types because we just tell it what columns we want and what list we want those columns from. It's real simple. But as you can see here, we can say, well, I only want, say, 5 items per page. I want to enable paging. I can say, is the list on the root site or not? By default, it is. There's that callback function. Oh, yeah, I can fill it in a view XML property. Beware, this view XML property is only applicable if you're hosted in SharePoint, because this format is CAML. CAML does not apply through the RESTful interface. So you cannot use the view XML property in this widget if you're in headless. And many other properties, how to load the data, caching, how to order your results, and so on. So it's a very powerful widget. We're going to focus on 2 of those fields. But if you want to know about any widget, just come out here and it tells you all about those widgets. So we're going to use this generic list widget to get data from a list. Well, what list? Let's go find one. This, by the way, is the delivery site that's hosting mine. Well, let's see here. Here we go. Let's use apps AK. We're going to get data from this. We're going to pull the title, and let's pull the title and the app icon. Title and app icon. How's that sound? All right. So we need to know more about that generic list widget. So let's go to our central site because we want to look at the configuration for it. And into the widget manager in the central site, find our generic list widget. There it is. And notice something about the namespace. The widget is generic list widget. The namespace is using generic list control widget. That's a leftover from an older version of this widget. This is the one widget that I was telling you about where the namespace doesn't exactly match the name of the widget. That's okay. It's just slightly confusing and it makes us have to do a little bit extra work. So how do we use this? How do we build an instance of this widget? To do that, and this is where you get to follow along, npm run stub, just like before. But now it's going to ask us the name of the widget. We're going to copy the name out of the app manager. This is the name of our widget. Copying and pasting so I don't make a mistake. Well, I'm going to try to paste. It's not letting me paste. Okay, I get to type it. All right, normally I would recommend copying and pasting. I don't know why it's not letting me. All right, the widget namespace. We're not going to build this widget instance because we're not building code. The widget already exists. We're just going to add a new view with a new instance to that widget. So we need to grab the namespace from the app manager. Let's see if it lets me do that. Akumina.addIn is the namespace for this widget. Yeah, of course not. Again, case is important. We must match this exactly. All right, so Akumina.addIn is our namespace. We're building an instance of that widget. It doesn't matter which stub I choose here. Doesn't matter where the source is because we're going to get rid of it. Do you want this stub to be used for an instance only? In this case, we say yes. And it doesn't matter if we say TypeScript or not. So generic list widget is the name. Akumina.addIn is the namespace. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This should be yes, and this doesn't matter. Now what it's done, the widget generator, has now given us a new widget, or a new widget source, generic list widget right here. Configuration, JavaScript, and views. We are adding an instance to an existing widget. We're not going to be modifying the source. So we can actually get rid of this entire JS folder right here. We don't need it underneath generic list widget, by the way. And I saw the folder, so we'll delete that. All right, so now we have a config file and we have a view. That's it. We go into that config file. There's our generic list widget. Here's our class. Oops. The widget generator assumed that the name and the class were going to match, but we know they don't. So we want that instead, generic list control widget. This name and this class are how the deployer is going to map our new instance to the existing generic list widget. So in our properties section here, we're not going to define any new properties. That's already defined. That widget already exists. So we're just going to clear that out. Make sure you keep the square brackets here. Most of the time when you're adding a new instance to an existing widget, it's because you want a new view. So we're going to have a new view here. I have already checked in advance. There is no view called default. So you can put whatever view you want here. In fact, since we're all going to be adding instances to the generic list widget, let's make this view our name. So my view will be Brad. We're going to need to rename the view over here. We're all going to have our own unique instance or view ID because every one of us ran the generator ourselves. So we don't have to worry about that. Since we're adding just an instance, we're not deploying JavaScript, so we can get rid of that. So here we have generic list widget for the name, acumen.addin.generic list control widget for the class, no properties defined, our new view with our name, use your name for your view, and no JavaScript. Once you've done that, raise your hand and we'll continue.
What was the first command you ran? npm stub?
Oh, npm run stub. Yeah, let me move this up so you can see it. Yeah, so npm run stub, and then you're going to want to fill in these values here, just like that, and then make sure your config.json file is updated like we see here.
So you have to right click if you want to paste the copied text.
Yeah, and I would copy and paste if you can out of the app manager. That way everything is exactly the way you want it.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
And that's these two values right here. And then again, you won't have any properties. You're not defining anything. All we're really doing here in the definition node, because this is going to be an instance only, is making sure it knows how to map to the existing widget and adding in any views that we want to use. Don't forget, use your name for your view here. All right. So that's it. The definition is nice and simple. Let's go down to our instances though. Again, you can give your instance a unique name. In fact, probably should actually I'll call it Brad get list for mine. You can use your name for yours. The generator already gave you a unique ID, but what do we do for the properties? Well, for the properties, we're going to need to, that's when we need to look at the widget in the app manager. So let's go edit this widget so we can see it. And we need to look and see, well, what properties do I need? You know, what are valuable? So as you can see, there's a lot of properties here for the generic list widget. The ones that really matter are select fields and list name. As long as you have these two, you're going to get output. You might want to set page size to something larger than 10, but we'll just stick to select fields and list name. And I'm going to cheat. See if I can actually copy and paste this time. I'll paste this into the chat as well. So remember our list name, we're going to use apps_AK. And if we go back out here, I'm just going to take a look. Title and app icon is what we're going to use. Case is important. Now, what's going to happen here is the generic list widget is going to pull back data from a list called apps_AK, and it's going to construct a data object where the elements in each item match the name of the elements in the list. So we always know that we're going to have a data object that's got an array in it called items, just so you're aware. And that array is going to have whatever fields we've selected right in here. I'll paste this into the chat for you. Here we go. So we're getting data from apps_AK, and the value or the fields, we're going to get the values for the fields title and app icon. Once you have updated your instance with this, raise your hand. We got one more thing to do in this file. All right, don't forget, we changed the name of our view. So we also need to select that view. So the last thing you want to do here is set the value for selected view to match the name of the view up here. Once you've done that, raise your hand again and we'll move on to our view itself. Fantastic. All right, so don't forget, I changed the name of my view. I'm calling it brad.html. We'll need to rename this view file right here. Now you notice I'm not calling it Brad generic list. I'm just calling it Brad because remember on deployment, this view will be inside the folder for the templates for this widget. So as long as it's unique within that folder, we're good. All right, now for this, we want to display a list, right? We're outputting a list. So we can just get rid of this whole div tag here in the view and put in the standard format for a list, right? UL, LI. What are we going to list? Well, we're going to list the apps. So we can put in a heading here. And we're going to list a number of them. There's actually, there's I think a dozen or so in there. Remember, we're not setting our page limit, so we're only going to get the first 10 back. But how do we render that? Well, we put in a handlebars tag like this. How do I know that I need to use a tag that says items? I know this because every Acumatica widget that returns data puts that data into an array called items. That's just something you're going to know. So from here on, anytime you're going to add an instance to an existing widget, just know that the array that will contain the list is always going to be called items. It's always going to have a capital I. In handlebars, this is called a block tag. I mentioned earlier, a block tag allows you to access the internal values of an object, but it also allows you to iterate through an array. So what's going to happen here is it's going to render every one of the items in that list, or at least the first 10 items in that list. So let's go ahead and grab these field names, because we know not only is the array going to be called items, but my tags are going to be the same name as the fields. Now, since this is a Font Awesome icon, I could put a Font Awesome tag here and we'd actually get the icon, but we're going to keep it simple. So I know that these are the values of the variables within the items array because these are the field names I requested. That's how generic list works. Whatever fields you request, it's going to put the results in an array called items, and those results are going to be using variable names that match the fields. So I'm just going to paste this into the chat. There you go. And once you have updated your view, renamed it, updated it, and pasted that in, raise your hand and we'll continue. All right, so now we want to deploy this widget. We're not going to add it to the page. We're going to keep this simple. We're going to deploy it, and then we're going to add it to our page from the interface itself. So again, npm run package. We don't have to build this. I do want to show you what's going to happen though if I run npm run build. If I run npm run build, it's going to try to build every widget in my source folder. Well, this isn't a widget to build. There's no JavaScript. So I'm going to get this error. And an entry module not found, can't resolve. Oh, that JavaScript file. It's expecting one because I'm executing build. That's fine. You can ignore that because it's going to still build the other widget, right? The one you've already built. It's going to try to build this one, but it can't because there's nothing to build. In future versions of the tooling, this will be a warning. Right now, it shows up as an error. It will be a warning in future versions. It's an error that you can ignore. So what we want to do, though, is package it. We're going to do a package, npm run package. Everything in here should be green if you do a package. Then npm run cdn package. By the way, you can use the up arrow to recall commands. Why are we doing a package and a CDN package? Well, we're doing a package because this configuration needs to be pushed out to SharePoint. We're doing a CDN package because my view needs to be pushed out to my headless site. So we've now done both of those. We're going to go to our site deployer config file. We're not going to deploy our virtual pages. We do need to execute the widgets step to get our config to SharePoint and the CDN assets step to get our view to our headless site. So to do that, npm run deploy. Go ahead and do all that, and let me know if you need me to recall those commands for you, and raise your hand once your widget is deployed, or let me know if you get an error here. All right, so we have, at this point, deployed a new view and a new instance of the generic list widget. We didn't insert it into our virtual page to deploy from here, so let's explore how we add it to our page out here. First thing we want to do is go into our widget manager and cache our widget instances. I do want to point out, if we scroll down here, we should find our instance in the generic list widget. You'll notice this has a 0. That doesn't always mean there are no instances in there. Sometimes it does. Am I in the central? Oh, I'm in my central site. That's why. Hold on. I want to be in my delivery site. So we'll go back out to the app manager from my page. And here, go to management apps, widget manager. Let's go ahead and see if our instance is in there. Scroll down to generic list widget. I'm still seeing no instances. That's interesting. Let me cache that just to see. I may have done something wrong here. Let's see. I'm going to go to the central site again. See, even the trainer doesn't do everything right the first time. Not sure exactly why it's not showing up. Let's see if we can see it here. I'm going to edit the page. This will actually, I'll show you how to add widgets to a page anyway this way. I've got a single column here. That's fine. I can just add my other widget into the same column. If I hit this toggle widget editing button and click plus, and I should see it over here. Oh, whoops, no, I'm going to do a global instance. There should be one already out there. There we go. Yeah, I'm not sure why it wasn't showing up in the app manager, but there it is. So what I did is I went to global instance. I looked for my name. Let's see if anybody else has one. Yep, look there, Brock has one. There we go. Yeah, everybody's got one. So that's how you add it. So you just search for your widget, click your widget name, click add widget, and you should ideally see output like this. Once you've added your widget to your page, just click Save Page. Now, word of warning. If you add a widget into a page here, and then you redeploy your page, it's going to revert to whatever you have in source. So just keep that in mind. Question? Oh, I thought there was a question. Sorry. So go ahead and add your widget to your page and let me know if it worked for you. Or if it didn't, either way.
I think I have a caching issue with the first widget. Class is not a function.
Yeah, so either a class mismatch or a caching issue. So if you're getting class is not a function, go back over to your widget manager and make sure both at the central site and your delivery site, click the cache widget instances button there. And then on the page in that debug panel, just refresh all cache. Do like a hard reload on your page with like a control F5, and that should resolve it. If not, we can take a look at your screen and see what we can do.
Okay, rookie question. What do you click to get the debug info again?
Oh, you go down here to the tray menu.
Yeah.
And click that button right there.
That button. Thank you.
Sure.
And then refresh.
I just
All?
refresh all. Yeah, it's fast.
Okay.
Technically, I think content is all you would have to refresh, content and template, but
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's virtually the
worked.
same speed.
Cool.
Did that work?
Yeah, that was just the hello world.
Oh, right, yeah.
I haven't added this one yet.
Okay. Yeah, so to add this one, we edit the page. We're just doing it through the UI. Click that toggle widget editing button there. Click into your zone and click that plus. Go to global and just search for yours. And you can just click it, click add widget, and then cancel out of this, and you should have it.
Yep, worked for me.
Awesome.
Sweet.
All right. Just a couple of more topics here. Any other questions over what we've covered so far? So we've already built a complete widget, and now we've seen how we can add a new instance and view to an existing widget.
Brad, I think I broke something. I'm seeing an error on my page. It says problem with page objects endpoint.
Ooh. You might have broken something. Can you share your screen? We're going to take a look at that.
Yeah, sure.
Interesting. Okay, so go ahead and open up your Visual Studio project. And click on your akumina.sitedeployer.config.json file. So the top tab there. Oh, yeah, there we go. So you redeployed your page along with your widget. That's fine. Let's take a look at your page. There, your training page there, shimindertraining.json. Oh, third tab in the top there. Or yeah, there we go. All right. Scroll down a little bit. Just going to take a look at this widgets here. All right, that all looks fine. Go back to your page. Not 100% sure what's going on here. And just do a Control F5 to reload it. Huh.
And this picture is also gone.
Yeah, that's just your user profile not having necessarily an image.
Yeah.
Some of the training accounts don't have it.
I used to see it earlier.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
You might log out and log back in.
Yeah, that might be helpful. You're also in incognito, I think, or not?
Yeah.
We had to do incognito because our single sign-on was trying to go in as us.
If you're not familiar with Chrome profiles, I use them all the time. And up there where it says incognito, if you were to click on that, you can add a profile. And that way, if you are dealing with, say, multiple different SharePoint worlds, you can use different browser profiles for each one.
That's cool.
Stores your cookies and all of your local storage in completely independent buckets. So it makes it a little bit, so you don't have to go to incognito every time. That is interesting because you can't get back. Go down to the tray menu there at the bottom. And let's open the debug panel. And hit refresh cache. Now go ahead and do Control F5 to reload your page. We might have to take this one offline. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that page.
That's fine. Yeah, we can continue with the training.
Okay. Yeah, you might want to go back through and just recreate a new virtual page. Make sure you have a new ID and try that page.
Sure, I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so a couple other things I want to talk about. If we go back here, so we created a widget from scratch. That's only going to really ever be the case if you're going to do something that's truly custom or where you're pulling data from an external source or something like that. If you're pulling data from an internal source, we already have a whole lot of widgets that do that. There's probably one that either does what you want or is close enough that you can use a callback function or inherit it. And by the way, I'll share a document that talks about dependency widgets so you can take advantage of that. But what if you just want to do something quick and dirty? You want to get some list data. For that, and you don't have to do this, just you can just watch. You can create a widget from the widget generator. Call it Brad list widget. Remember, we're going to use our namespace because this is a custom widget. We'll use the get list sample, not an instance only, not using TypeScript. All right, so now we have this Brad list widget right over here. It's going to be a complete widget. I'm not going to touch my configuration file. I'm going to go into my JavaScript. You'll notice that it's got a bit more in the render function, but notice right here, list name. Hey, look at that, apps AK. I'll just do that. I'll use the title just like before. I'm not going to worry about the font awesome icon. I could add that if I wanted to. I'm going to go into my view. Actually, you know what? I am gonna steal the view from the one we already did. And go back to my new widget. Put that in there. I'll go ahead and do the app icon just so you can see that. Watch this. I'm done. I just recreated what we did before using the generic list, or not the generic list widget, but the get list sample. That's literally it. I'm done at this point. I could build this and deploy it, and I've got a new widget that loads list data and displays it. You'll also get a document that shows how to take this example right here and make it more generic. For example, this could be a property on your widget. So that could be a list selector property. This could be your select fields property. The document actually shows you how to parse this field and iterate through it here. But why would you want to do this instead of the generic list widget? I mean, it wasn't any harder. In fact, it was even easier, or it was about the same level of effort as this, and we know it's already tested. So why would you want to do this instead? Well, as you can see here, it's pushing all of the results into an array called items. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want to do something to those fields. Maybe it's a date field and you want to parse and you want to format it. So do a culture format on it before you process it. You could do that. Maybe you want to add other values into your data object. You can't really do that with the generic list widget if you're just adding an instance to it. Maybe you want additional properties. Maybe you want to have like a class property so that your designer can put in CSS. There are all sorts of situations where you might find that this is a more direct approach to getting list data and displaying it than the generic list widget. There are probably just as many reasons to use the generic list widget. So consider using one or the other. But as you can see, it's very simple. What if you want to get data from a third-party system? Well, just replace that with an AJAX request into that other API, format your data, drop it into your data object, and you're ready to go. You're going to get a a widget called the generic interface widget that demonstrates that. It also demonstrates caching and how to grab the icon and title of your instance so that you can use those in your output. When they're there, you might as well take advantage of it. So you're going to get those as well after the training. I do want to talk about one more element here in this request object. You may remember we talked about that view XML property. The view XML property is a property that uses camel to allow you to select into your list object. That is not valid in a headless environment. Instead, you want to use a property called filter. The filter property is going to use a Microsoft KML filter. You can build those filters in SharePoint. If I go into my system here, we go ahead and jump into our site settings. Okay, I think I have to go to site contents first. There we go, site settings. And we go down in here into search. And I believe it's schema. I might have to dig here. No, it's not schema. And I gotta remember, I can't remember where it is, but it's in search somewhere. Oh, there it is. Sorry, search query rules. I was in the wrong spot. Oh, this one's set up a little different. I apologize. But to build a query, you do need to find, and I can't remember where it is in here, but there's a section in here that allows you to enter the SharePoint query builder. And once you do, then you can basically test a query in here, get it the way you want it. And I'm just going to keep clicking while I talk. Get it the way you want it, and then use that in the filter property of your request object. Tyler, let's make a note to get back to them on making sure they know where to find that query builder, because that's really handy.
Yes.
So once you figure out your query, then you basically just add it in here into your request object, and then there's your query. That allows you, I always recommend using queries.
Brad, is Query Builder in the debugger? Or am I just?
No, it's not in there. It's
That's a
going to be
different
in SharePoint. Yeah, I'll dig around and I'll find it. But that's really useful. Okay, I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet, or not a spreadsheet, a PowerPoint, because there's just a couple of slides I want to show, and then we're actually done for the day. We will share a number of documents with you: that widget best practices guide, the sample widgets, the guide to taking this generic or this list format and making it more generic. You're going to get all those. The links to the videos, just beware they're for 4.8, so a couple of them are kind of out of date. And you'll also get a number of other assets once we're done. But I wanted to pull up that training. I believe it's in this PowerPoint here. There we go. I knew I could find it somewhere. All right, so two things that I want to talk about. One is some automatic functions. One of the page load lifecycle steps will insert the site logo that you have configured in your theme into your site. And all you have to do is have a div with a class of ak-site-logo and an image tag inside it. As long as you have that div with an image tag inside it, the source for your configured site logo will be inserted. So it's a great way to manage your general site logo. Also, while I have this open, anytime you have an anchor with a class of AKSPA link, you can have an href value in it like this, and this will automatically be fully qualified for your site. So it's a nice way to put a generic link in that gets formatted properly for your site. So you can add your site logo and any SPA link like that. And then the next thing I want to show, the last thing I want to show, over here. And we talked about it. No, it's not in here. Actually, that was what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about how you can add widgets into your master page. I'm looking one more PowerPoint here, see if I can find it so you can see it. I guess it's not in here. Yeah, I can't remember exactly where that was, but I did want to point out that you can add widgets into both your pages like we saw, but also using a widget snippet, your master page. The trick with the widget snippet in the master page is you have to wrap it in that one tag that I was talking about earlier in part 2 of the training. All right, with that, we can actually break. We covered it all. So any questions before we conclude? And anything you want to do to wrap it up, Tyler?
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So in the widget JavaScript, so you were using jQuery this time. So let's say if we want to use some other library, let's say for some image effect, we want to use image effects or reflection.js or any other library. Is it possible to use that?
Yes. So let me share my screen again. If you want to use any additional libraries, you're going to want to put them. They're going to need to go in. The library will need to go in your CDN assets folder. In JS, create a folder in your source called vendor. And in there, make sure you put your JS files.
Okay.
So if you want to use any additional libraries, just make sure you put them in here in this vendor folder. Now, that actually brings up something I wanted to point out. And if we go, I got to remember where it is. Yesterday, we were talking about the admin and where to control what. There it is. Yeah, where to control what JavaScript files are loading and CSS files are loading. To get there, you go to your site and go to admin settings. That. And, or is it in your ad? Oh, I think it's out here actually in your app manager settings. Gotta find it. No. Never can remember where it is. Here, I'll just show you an example. Oh, I see. Never mind. It's actually located in your main site. Yeah, I can't remember where it is. Hang on a second. I'll pull it up on this one. There we go. So if you go to the admin settings page for your site collection, that was the problem I wasn't using the site collection. You'll see all the sites in there. Go into the site that you want to manage. And in here, you'll see there's where you set your master page. You don't have to give it the path. It's expecting the path. If you want to add any JavaScript files, put the path into those. Note you start at a Kumina library and work your way down. So if you want to start at another library, put it in that one folder and just make sure you put a path to it here. You can comma separate them and they will be loaded in the order you list them here. Same with CSS files. If you want to add a new CSS file right there. Don't worry about these last two. But this is where you add you configure which master page file you want to use, what JavaScript files you want to load, and what CSS files you want to load. And it's in your site collection admin site settings. Just make sure you select the appropriate site. I'm glad you asked that question because it's an important one.
And we don't have to explicitly reference that in the JavaScript file, right? It will automatically reference that.
Correct. Yeah. So once you add it there, if you were to look at the markup on your page when it loads, you'd see that as a script tag loading that script file, that particular JS file.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And my next question is like with headless, you said the main advantage of that is we can use any kind of language, right? And there was also a reference to installing the .NET Core. So we just want to know where that whole thing fits in. So let's say I want to use .NET Core and I want to use Razor or Blazor for creating my HTML. So can we do that?
Well, not really, because for that, you're actually dealing with the Kumina framework itself. If we were to actually look at if we were to go out here to the headless site, you don't actually have access to the source for the web root or for the web application itself. You're just going to be managing what goes here in this Kumina library folder. And technically we shouldn't see these here. You would literally just see a Kumina library. So you wouldn't really have access to the rendering part of the web application for the headless. You would only have access to the assets that are being used by it. Because remember, every page is virtual. There's actually a Razor page out there that is the page wrapper. So if we were to go back over here, this whole thing is actually being rendered by a single page in the web application.
So when you talk about a separate web server that's going to be running, I think that Kumina was going to host, it's running that virtual page in the host. And then all we're doing is building these little views that go into it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the structure for that virtual page is based on that master page that we were looking at yesterday. But really, there's a thin wrapper around that. It's just the engine that drives it. Everything else is being driven by the design of your master page, the design of your widgets, your layouts, and your virtual layouts, and so forth.
So for headless, it's just basically where we're storing the content and all that, right? It doesn't necessarily give us the power to use any kind of language or framework which we want to use.
Yeah, you're still limited to whatever JavaScript frameworks you want to use, CSS frameworks, things like that. You're not going to be rendering the page at the highest level. You're building what goes in it.
This might not be a question for you, but what about accessing assets like SQL on our internal Blair network?
So the best way to do that is through web endpoints. We do have the ability to host web endpoints. We call it the Service Hub, but they're basically Microsoft web endpoints. You could obviously, if you want to say access a SQL server, you'd probably want to stand up a web application and build an endpoint yourself.
In front of that, okay.
Yeah, and just put that web endpoint in front of it, and then you can hit that with a widget or with your own AJAX calls.
That's where you could put your .NET Core web API.
Right. Yeah.
So we could have a server, our own server that can access our own internal stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, and then that gives you whatever endpoints you want. You're in total control of that, and then you can just simply access that data via those endpoints in widgets here.
Yeah, so we can create APIs with whichever framework we want to, and then to access that, we will have to work in the confinements of Cumna framework.
Right. Yeah. And just, using a widget like the one we just did where we get a list, instead of using a get list call, you do something like an Ajax call to hit your endpoint.
My next question is on the search functionality you have over there. So what we have right now is basically we scan the whole our internet site every day, and so then basically if I'm searching for something, if it is in any of the articles on any of the web page or any PDF or any sort of document, so it will automatically search that. We index that, and then we can use that index to search it. So does Ecumena does that automatically? If I search for something which is in a PDF or a Word document, will it search that automatically, or we will have to enhance those capability as well?
Oh, if the document is hosted in SharePoint and you've got your search configuration set up to do that, then yes. So it all depends on how you've got search set up. We're leveraging the Microsoft SharePoint search or the Microsoft search engine here. So that's why when I jumped into the search configuration in SharePoint, that's really where you're going to control that. But I think out of box, the way it's set up typically, as long as it's hosted in your SharePoint site, as long as that document is, it should search into it.
If you want to add anything to the search functionality?
Yeah, and I was going to say, because we're using the Microsoft search here, if you're leveraging a different search engine, then you're going to want to replace this with a widget that's going to hit that engine through its RESTful interface.
We might want to do that, create a new widget and use our Azure search index.
Yeah, it's kind of up to you which way you go with that. But yeah, since this is this bar here, all this is doing is it's triggering a callback function that's making a RESTful query into Microsoft Search. And if I go into this, we have another widget. This is the generic search list widget here. This is also making a query into that. You'd want to replace this with your own query and replace this widget here with your own results widget. Unless, of course, this worked for you. So I'd recommend trying it out and seeing if it gives you what you need.
Rob, you have any other question regarding search?
I don't think so. We'll just have to look at it. This one looks quite capable, so it'd be a shame to not leverage it.
I was going to say, try it out before you make any changes.
Understood.
Schmitter and I've done a lot of different things with search between projects, so
Oh, good. Okay.
we'll have a lot of ideas.
I bet. That's good. Yeah.
But this one's good because it's already all integrated and it already does the security pruning based on
Right.
SharePoint security.
Yeah, it's exactly. So you've already got all that enabled and set up for you.
Just have to test it. Yep.
We will share videos of these trainings. And like I said, you'll get a bunch of assets as well. You'll get a link to helpful resources. And then keep the sample site definition that we used during the training. I find it to be very helpful whenever I'm starting up a new project to just drop it in and then use what I want and prune away what I don't want.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks everybody for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Tyler or me, and we can assist. We're happy to assist.
This is very helpful. Appreciate it.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. Thanks everybody.
Great. Thanks
Thank
for everyone's
you.
time. The
Thank you.
recording and the resources will be in our OneDrive later
Great.
today.
Awesome.